period from 1970 to 1979 was one of revolution in American cinema. It saw the rise of independent movies that didn't rely on the traditional studio system. It would also see cinema redefine itself to one that would understand cinemagoers' behavior, resulting in the emergence of the summer blockbuster, the home video market, and cable channels that meant film production would need to increase to meet the demands of US homes. The undisputed king of these years was undoubtedly Francis Ford Coppola. Despite only being attached to 5 films that went into production, his awards haul is one that has not been matched by any other director, and to this day, he is still the only director to go up against himself for Best Picture and Best Director in numerous awards ceremonies, and one of only a handful of filmmakers to join the exclusive 2-timers club for the Palme D'Or. But what was the cost of this prolific period on the man himself? And how did his 1970s output redefine cinema for decades to come and become the benchmark for other directors to aspire to for decades? The son of composer Carmine Coppola, Francis was born in 1939 in Michigan. Coppola was a mediocre student, but with a keen interest in drama. Despite his father's best efforts to get him to study engineering, he entered Hofstra College in 1955 to study the arts, and soon got involved in the college's drama and cinema societies. His drama interest began to wane, and he began to focus on cinema, making ends meet upon graduating by editing and shooting additional footage for a range of productions that had either come over from Europe or languished on the shelves due to post-production difficulties. This brought him to the attention of Roger Corman, who eventually gave the young Coppola the directing reins of Dementia 13, a film that Coppola wrote in one evening and that owed a huge debt to Psycho. This would lead Coppola into a wide range of writing and directing projects that would result in him being at the forefront of a group of filmmakers known as the New Hollywood that emerged in the early 70s with ideas that challenged conventional filmmaking. The group included Spielberg, Scorsese, De Palma, Malick, Altman, Allen, Friedkin, Kaufman, and Lucas, who Coppola would meet on the set of Finian's Rainbow, a meeting that would result in their becoming lifelong friends. Coppola's status in Hollywood would be elevated when in 1963 he was hired to write a film script based on the life of General George S. Patton. His script would be based on the books Patton, Ordeal and Triumph, and A Soldier's Story. Coppola's draft, however, was rejected by the studio. I wrote the script of Patton, and the script was very controversial when I wrote it, because they thought it was so stylized. It was supposed to be like, sort of, The Longest Day. I had this very bizarre opening where he stands up in front of an American flag and gives this speech. Ultimately, I wasn't fired, but I was fired, meaning that when the script was done, they said, "Okay, thank you very much," and they went and hired another writer, and that script was forgotten. Luckily for Coppola, the star of the film, George C. Scott, read the script and loved Coppola's version with its long monologue opening of Patton in front of a US flag, an opening that has now become one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. The writing of Patton coincided with Coppola forming Zoetrope Studios, an independent production company, and one of the earliest films it backed would be George Lucas's THX 1138. The film would overrun and put Coppola in debt to Warner Brothers to the tune of $300,000. And despite initially turning down an offer to write and direct The Godfather, which Coppola found sleazy and sensationalist, he relented to ensure he could clear his debt for a fee of $125,000 and 6% of the gross rentals. Paramount had paid $80,000 for the rights to The Godfather and an additional $100,000 for Puzo to write the screenplay. He and Coppola would work on the script separately, with Coppola tearing his favourite pages from the original novel to essentially create his own version of the book, which would be called upon during the filming. The film's budget was only $2.5 million, but would rise to around $7 million due to casting choices and overruns. The studio, however, were not happy with Coppola during production, and Coppola owes a huge debt to Patton for being able to complete the film. I didn't get along with the producer Bob Evans during The Godfather. He was so tough on me. I was seriously on the verge of getting fired maybe on 3 or 4 occasions. Had I not won the Oscar for Patton, I would absolutely have been fired from The Godfather. The Godfather was released in 1972 and became the highest grossing film of the year and contributed hugely to an upturn in fortune for its studio, Paramount Pictures, who had sold the television rights to NBC for $10 million. The Godfather was a very unappreciated movie when we were making it. They were very unhappy with it. They didn't like the cast, they didn't like the way I was shooting it. I was always on the verge of getting fired, so it was an extremely nightmarish experience. The film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and was a hot favourite on the night, but ultimately only won 3: Supporting Actor for Brando, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture. Coppola would be overlooked for direction, but would win at the Directors Guild of America and the Golden Globes. Immediately following the completion of the film, Coppola was full of doubt still about the outcome. I had 2 little kids, and the third was born during filming. We lived in a little apartment, and I was basically frightened that they didn't like it. They had as much as said that, so when it was all over, I wasn't at all confident that it was going to be successful, and that I'd ever get another job. So I took a job right away when it was done. They needed someone to write a script of The Great Gatsby very quickly for the movie they were making. I took this job so I'd be sure to have some dough to support my family. That version of the film never came to fruition, but the success of The Godfather meant that Coppola's financial worries would soon disappear, and he would be quickly rehired to write and direct The Godfather Part 2. Before filming The Godfather Part 2, Coppola would film a project he had long been writing called TheConversation. Ultimately, he'd work on The Godfather Part 2 in parallel to TheConversation. The 2 films would be released around the same time, resulting in them competing against each other during awards season. The idea for The Conversation originated in a conversation between me and Irving Kershner. We were talking about espionage, and he said that most people thought the safest way not to be bugged was to walk in a crowd. But he had heard that there were microphones which were capable of picking out specific voices in a crowd. I thought, wow, that's a great motif for a film. And it started there, around 1966. I actually started working on it around 1967, but it was on again, off again project, which I was never able to beat until 1969 when I did a first draft. Despite grossing more than was invested in it, The Conversation was not considered a commercial success. The film was rewarded, however, with the Palme D'Or at the 1974 Cannes Film Festival, and was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant in 1995. Meanwhile, The Godfather Part 2, despite having a script initially rejected by its star Al Pacino, resulting in a hasty rewrite, would become Paramount's highest-grossing film of 1974 and would become the first ever sequel to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, and would also earn Coppola a raft of other awards. It would also result in another first in cinema history, with both The Godfather Part 2 and The Conversation going up against each other for Best Picture, and Coppola would become the first writer nominated for both original screenplay and adapted screenplay in the same year at the Oscars. Following the success of The Godfather, The Conversation, and The Godfather Part 2, Coppola found himself with a huge amount of financial security and artistic credibility. Through his Zoetrope Studios production company, which had now produced the highly successful American Graffiti, as well as Coppola's films, Coppola worked with John Milius on an adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, with the plan on having George Lucas direct and transplanting the novel from the US Civil War to the Vietnam War. Coppola eventually took over directorial control and was influenced by Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, in his approach to the material. Apocalypse Now's ill-starred 238 days shooting in the Philippines had become the stuff of filmmaking legend, much of it captured in Hearts of Darkness, George Hickenlooper's documentary about the making of the film, pieced together from behind-the-scenes footage shot by Coppola's wife, Eleanor. Some of the incidents that plagued the film included Coppola dropping his leading man, Harvey Keitel, a couple of weeks into shooting, only for his replacement, Martin Sheen, to have a near-fatal heart attack. A typhoon destroyed much of the set. Coppola had an epileptic seizure. The helicopters he had rented from the Philippine government repeatedly disappeared off to take part in actual combat, fighting an insurgency in the south of the country. The pilots were rarely the same from rehearsal to rehearsal, and the choppers had to be repainted twice a day to change their colors from American back to Filipino. When Brando turned up on set, he was overweight and underprepared. He insisted his character should be called Colonel Lely, and Harrison Ford shot scenes referring to him by that name, which had to be redubbed later on when Brando belatedly came around to the name Kurtz. And on top of this, Coppola also had to contend with Dennis Hopper's drug use and difficult and argumentative personality. This only solidified Coppola's belief that his finished film reflected the Vietnam War itself, as he said famously in a news conference at the Cannes Film Festival. "My film is not a movie. It's not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." In 1979, Coppola screened A Work in Progress for 900 people. It was not well received. That year, he was invited to screen Apocalypse Now at the Cannes Film Festival. United Artists were not keen on showing an unfinished version to so many members of the press. However, since his 1974 film TheConversation had won the Palme D'Or, Coppola agreed to screen Apocalypse Now. The week prior to Cannes, Coppola arranged 3 sneak previews of a 139-minute cut in Westwood, Los Angeles on May the 11th, attended by 2,000 paying customers, some of whom lined up for over 6 hours. Other cuts shown in 1979 ran 150 and 165 minutes. The film was also shown at the White House for Jimmy Carter on May the 10th. Coppola allowed critics to attend the LA screenings and believed they would honor an embargo not to review the work in progress. However, on May 14th, Rona Barrett previewed the film on television on Good Morning America and called it a disappointing failure. This prompted Variety to believe the embargo had been broken, and it published its review the following day, saying it was worth the wait, calling it a brilliant and bizarre film. A 3-hour version of Apocalypse Now was screened as a work in progress at the Cannes Film Festival on Saturday, May the 19th, 1979, and met with prolonged applause. It would ultimately land Coppola his second Palme d'Or, and today is regarded as a masterpiece and the finest film about the Vietnam War. But despite 7 Academy Award nominations, it would only win 2, for Best Cinematography and Best Sound. As the 70s came to a close and America adopted Reaganomics, Hollywood moved away from the auteur control that had been prevalent in the 70s. Failures such as Heaven's Gate, which kicked off the 80s, put an end to the director-driven production, and the rise of the shopping mall culture and the summer blockbuster and actor power meant a different kind of film would be popularized. Apocalypse Now marked the end of the golden phase of Coppola's career. His musical fantasy, One from the Heart, would be a critical and financial failure. As a result, he was forced to sell his 23-acre Zoetrope studio in 1983. He would spend the rest of the decade working to pay off his debts. And despite some success with The Outsiders and Peggy Sue Got Married, he would never reach the heights of his 1970s period. Zoetrope Studios finally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1990, after which its name was changed to American Zoetrope. The 1990s would see The Godfather 3 released to mixed reviews, and Bram Stoker's Dracula becoming a box office hit. The rest of the 90s were uneventful, and would even involve Coppola having to help to try and rescue the sci-fi film Supernova, with little success. Coppola still makes films and has overseen re-edited versions of his previous films, including Apocalypse Now Redux and The Godfather Part 3, now retitled as Mario Puzo's The Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone. It's safe to say, though, that the 1970s were Coppola's decade, and you could argue that the drain on Coppola in making Apocalypse Now and the change in Hollywood and its drive for box office returns had a real effect on his output in the preceding decades. Regardless, Coppola's achievements in the 1970s can never be taken for granted. He achieved in 10 years what some directors take their whole careers to achieve. And that's why, here at the Film Fellas, we herald Francis Ford Coppola as the greatest filmmaker of the 1970s. Thanks for watching. Enjoyed this video? Then don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes of Film Fellas. You could also leave a comment below or chat to us on Twitter at TheFilmFellasUK.